Hey friends, tonight we're diving into something darker. No knights in shining armor or fairy tale castles. Think more dirt floors, parasites, and suffering disguised as breakfast. Because medieval life, let's be honest, you wouldn't survive a full day. So if you're tucked into a clean bed right now, maybe let your fan hum in the background, take a deep breath, and appreciate the luxury. You're about to wake up in the year 1325. Congratulations, you're alive. But so are the fleas. You stir awake on a lumpy straw mattress that smells like a livestock pen and feels like it was dragged out of one. Because it was. There's no memory foam, no sheets, and definitely no thread count, just a scratchy wool blanket that's absorbed months of body odor and probably weighs as much as a full-grown goat. A distant church bell tolls. That's your alarm. It's louder than your smoke detector and about 10 times less forgiving. You're in a one-room timber hut with no windows, no insulation, and zero personal space. The entire family, including that one cousin who just showed up one day and never left, is sharing the same room. So are the chickens, and the bugs, and the smell. The air is a charming blend of stale beer, goat musk, wet wool, and maybe mold. Probably mold. There's no scented candle to cover it. Those haven't been invented. Even if they were, they'd melt straight into your dirt floor. You try to stretch, but your body immediately regrets it. You're 22, which is middle-aged here. Your joints creak like an old barn door. Your knees? They sound like you were shaking a bag of gravel. Getting out of bed is a gamble. Step down and you're either in last night's rain puddle or a mysterious crust that may or may not have been laid by the family's chicken. You wince, and now you're standing, barefoot, naturally, because shoes are a luxury. The floor is a living ecosystem of mud, straw, manure, and yesterday's regrets. It's not a surface, it's a texture. There's no bedroom to escape to, no curtain to hide behind, just communal everything. Privacy doesn't exist. You wake up beside your parents, siblings, maybe a baby, maybe a stranger. You'll eat, sleep, sneeze, and pick lice out of each other's hair in full view. It's a constant brute project in survival. And just when you think it can't get worse, it does. Because now, nature calls. You shuffle outside, stomach groaning. Forget plumbing. There's no porcelain, no water pressure, and absolutely no toilet paper. If you're a peasant, and you are, your bathroom is a wooden bucket behind the house. It's already overflowing because Uncle Wolfston had a questionable experience with some turnips last night. The smell. Think fermented sadness mixed with burning compost. You hold your breath, do your business, and then, here comes the fun part. You throw it into the street. Yes, the street. Custom dictates you yell "Gardilou" before dumping your waste out the window. That's old French for incoming feces, essentially. Nobody moves in time. Streets are open sewers. Picture rivers of human waste, horse droppings, and thick puddles of mystery goo. And if you're in a town lucky enough to have public latrines, you'll get to sit side by side with strangers on a long bench with a shared trench. It's an awkward game of don't make eye contact, while praying you don't fall in. Toilet paper, try moss, leaves, a handful of straw. Maybe a rag, if you're wealthy. Some just use nothing, which explains why nobody shakes hands. Not yet, anyway. Now, castles must be better, right? Not really. Nobles relieve themselves in what's called a garderobe, a fancy term for a hole in the wall that drops waste into the moat below. Convenient, but vulnerable. Enemies have been known to climb in through those same waste chutes during sieges. Yes, medieval plumbing was so bad, it doubled as an entrance for hostile soldiers. No matter your status, going is public, gross, and an invitation for infection. A slip on a wet stone, and you're face down in medieval leftovers. And just to be clear, you haven't brushed your teeth yet. That's coming next. But first, you deserve a meal, right? Time for breakfast. Except, this is the Middle Ages. Breakfast isn't a joy. It's a dare. You slouch over to the hearth. hoping for something warm and nourishing. Instead, you get a bowl of pottage, a thick, sad sludge of grains, root vegetables, and whatever was still edible last night. It's not cooked. It's continuously added to, like an edible compost heap. New ingredients are dumped in daily. No one washes the pot. Alongside it, you get a hunk of bread that could double as a blunt weapon. It's baked from coarse barley or rye flour, often padded out with sawdust, old acorns, or, in desperate times, tree bark. This is not toast. It's a punishment. Drinks, not water. That'll kill you. It's filled with bacteria, sewage, and plague potential. So instead you get weak beer. Even the kids drink it. Not because it's fun. Because it's the only thing that's boiled. Thinking of cheese or meat? Forget it. Those are feast day luxuries. And spices? A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly rent. You'll taste onions if you're lucky. Most of the time, your food tastes like grey. But hey, you're not here to enjoy. You're here to survive. And now that you've fueled up on gritty bread and beer-flavoured water, it's time to get dressed for the day. Sort of. Your wardrobe? One outfit. That's it. You've worn it every day for months, maybe years. It's a rough wool tunic, coarse and itchy, held together by uneven stitching and sheer will. No undergarments, no socks. If you're lucky, a linen shift underneath. If not, it's medieval freeballing. Washing it, good luck. There's no soap, no machine. You'd have to hold water, heat it, scrub with ashes, and hang it in the rare sunlight. So you don't. Which is why your clothes smell like an abandoned barn fire, and you do too. Shoes. Most peasants go barefoot. Through mud, through manure, through sharp stones and deceased puddles. If you do own shoes, they're made of brittle leather and fall apart faster than your back will later today. Your skin itches constantly. You've got fleas, lice, bed bugs. No one escapes. Even the monks are itchy. Even the nobles are scratching behind their ears while pretending they aren't. You're a walking insect colony in wool armor. And with that, you're finally ready to start your day. Your joints hurt, your hair is greasy, your breath could kill crops, and your breakfast is fermenting in your gut. The sun is rising. You're alive. Barely. You've survived waking up, using a glorified bucket as a toilet, choking down disease-resistant stew, and getting dressed in what amounts to an itchy curse. Congratulations, time to get to work. Because in the Middle Ages, rest isn't real, it's just the time between plagues. Forget offices, break rooms, or even a shady tree to sit under. Your job, if you're like the vast majority of people, is simple. Survive long enough to serve your lord another day. You're a peasant, a serf, a human cog in someone else's wealth machine. The workday starts with the sun. Not because you're feeling inspired, but because daylight is the only time you can actually see what you're doing. You grab your tools, likely a worn wooden hoe, a splintery rake, or if you're lucky, a rusted sickle, and shuffle into the fields. Your back already hurts. You haven't even bent over yet. 6 days a week, sun up to sundown, you labor. Rain, keep working. Fever, keep working. Missing toe, keep working. There's no time off request form. No mental health day. You're lucky if you can take a bathroom break without your master raising an eyebrow. And Sundays. Technically, you get them off for church. But if crops are failing or raiders are threatening nearby, you're back in the dirt by noon. You dig. You plant. You pull weeds. You carry water from wells or rivers, sloshing over muddy paths and dodging livestock that do not respect personal space. Your spine begins to curl like a shrimp. Your hands blister, then callous, then bleed again. Eventually, you stop noticing. That's how you know you've adjusted. Women, you're working too. You don't just raise children, you raise everything. Animals, bread, buckets of water, literal hell. You spin wool, cook, clean, wash, haul, and pretend your husband's lice haven't jumped ship to your side of the bed. And if you're a child, Congratulations, you start your apprenticeship in misery around age 5. No toys, no school, just a rake your size and the hope that this year's harvest doesn't kill your family. You break a bone, tough luck. Get back out there with a limp. You get an infection, drink warm ale and whisper to God. Hope he's listening. And if you're not a farmer, maybe you're lucky enough to be a tradesperson, say, a blacksmith or tanner. Great. You now work with fire, chemicals, or rotting animal parts in a tiny, unventilated shack. You smell like cooked death and have the respiratory health of a chimney. But don't worry, the pay is consistent, starvation wages. Maybe a few coins if your lord is generous, but more often it's grain or bread, or just not being kicked off the land. Got dreams of social mobility? Let them go. You're born poor, you stay poor. You're essentially renting your own life until it runs out. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get enough hate in history books: the weather. In the Middle Ages, the concept of seasons wasn't a fun Instagram post. It was a daily beatdown from above. Weather wasn't an inconvenience, it was a full-time enemy. Let's begin with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, no cozy socks. Your home is made of wooden planks with gaps you can see daylight through. Windows, covered with cloth if you're lucky. Drafts sneak in like ghosts. The fireplace, if you have one, barely warms a few inches beyond the hearth. And you don't have enough firewood to keep it burning. Why not gather more wood? Oh, because that forest near your village belongs to the Lord. Picking up the wrong stick could get you fined, jailed, or executed. So you freeze quietly in your lumpy tunic, teeth chattering like a medieval percussion instrument. Frostbite isn't treated. It's called bad luck. But wait, summer's worse. Your hut becomes an oven. There's no breeze, no shade, no deodorant. You're sweating through every layer, and you can't strip down, because society says modesty greater than comfort. Besides, showing skin invites sunburn, scandal, and about 40 new insect bites per minute. Flies, everywhere, mosquitoes, insatiable. The smell of your own body, unforgivable. You're working in the fields while your skin bakes and your head spins. No sunblock, no water bottles. You have a straw hat if you're lucky. And if not, well, enjoy the medieval sunstroke. They called it taking ill. Translation, you passed out in a cabbage patch and woke up 3 hours later with dirt in your nose and regret in your soul. And no matter the weather, rain, snow, scorching sun, your job never changes. The grain needs harvesting. The animals need feeding. The taxes need paying. Because someone has to keep the Lord's table full. It sure isn't going to be him. At this point, you're freezing in the winter, roasting in the summer, and soaked every time it rains. Because no one thought to waterproof anything. Your roof leaks, your shoes leak, your life leaks. So what do you do to cool off? Take a drink of water? Take a bath? Nope, because water in the 1300s wants to kill you. Let's talk hydration. That stream near your home might look clear and peaceful, like something out of a fantasy novel. But it's a trap. Upstream, someone just dumped their chamber pot into it. Or a rotting animal. Or both. You don't drink the water because it's full of bacteria and parasites. Instead, you drink beer. Yes, even kids. Not because it's fun, but because it's boiled. It's called small beer. Low alcohol, high survival rate. It's basically medieval Pedialyte. Rich folks drink wine, but you're on the ale diet, morning to night. Don't worry, it won't get you drunk, just barely hydrated and constantly bloated. Bathing. Good luck. People used to bathe more, but then bad science and suspicious priests stepped in. Rumors spread that bathing opened your pores to disease. So you were healthier if you stayed dirty. Literal layers of grime were seen as protective. Communal bathhouses did exist, but many were shut down due to, let's say, extracurricular activities. The church frowned on nudity and public hygiene coexisting. So bathhouses were seen as suspicious, scandalous, possibly sinful. Want to wash at home. First, pour the water, then boil it over a fire, then pour it into a leaky wooden tub, then pray that someone else didn't bathe in it first, or worse after. Oh, and rain barrels, full of bird poop, insect larvae, and moss. Sounds refreshing. Water in medieval life was a wild gamble. You didn't just fear disease, you feared bathing for causing disease. And that's if you even had time for it. Next time you sip a glass of clean tap water or enjoy a warm shower, remember, you're cheating death like a wizard compared to your ancestors. And while we're on the topic of dying, let's talk about medicine, or what passed for it. Let's say you've stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment. Or maybe you drank a suspicious gulp of water, and now your stomach feels like it's doing medieval gymnastics. What do? You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad. In the Middle Ages, doctors don't really exist. Not the way we think of them. Medicine is basically a cocktail of superstition, religion, and guesswork sprinkled with a healthy dose of torture. It's how it works. Your body is controlled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling off. Clearly, your internal soup recipe is unbalanced. Fever. Too much blood. Depression. That's too much black bile. Headache. Maybe your phlegm's in a bad mood. So what's the cure? Well, bloodletting. Yes, they actually cut you open to drain blood. Or they slap leeches on your skin like biological suction cups. The idea is to remove the excess humor. Does it help? Not really, but hey, at least you're lightheaded and distracted from your original symptoms. And here's the kicker. Barbers often perform this. That's right. The same guy who trims your bangs also slices open your veins. 2 for 1 special. Feeling anxious or just off? Time for a laxative or a good purge. Warm herbal brew, if you're lucky. Cow dung and vinegar, if you're not. And if things still aren't looking up, a priest might be called in. Not to heal you, just to start preparing your soul for the inevitable. Let's say you break a bone, or get a nasty cut. Now you're in real danger. There's no anesthesia, no antiseptic, no antibiotics. Surgery is performed with rusted knives and shaky hands, often by people who've never read a single book. They don't believe in germs yet. Disease comes from bad air or moral failings. You were probably just too sinful last week. That's why your leg's infected. For a stomach ache. Must be, because you invite your neighbor's goat. Hope you're ready to confess your sins while vomiting into a straw pile. And if your condition gets worse, expect more leeches, maybe crushed beetles, and eventually a priest giving you your last rites, just in case your soul hasn't gotten the memo. Modern medicine is centuries away, and here, recovery is basically a miracle. Survive, God's blessing. Die, also God's will. Either way, your chances aren't great. Oh, and dental problems. Buckle up. Your teeth are a battlefield, and they're losing. There's no toothpaste, no toothbrush, no floss, no concept of oral hygiene. The most you might do is chew on a stick or rinse your mouth with vinegar. Your teeth decay slowly and painfully. Cavities turn into abscesses. Gums swell and bleed. Your breath could start fires. By your mid-20s, your smile looks like an archaeological dig site. If you get a bad enough toothache, your options are: pray, drink heavily, yell until someone knocks the tooth out, or go see a barber surgeon who will rip it out with metal tongs and zero mercy. If the wound gets infected, you could die. Yes, die, from a toothache. No antibiotics, no root canals, just inflammation, fever, and eventual sepsis. All because you chewed the wrong piece of bark. Kissing. Don't even try it. Everyone's breath smells like a cheese grater soaked in vinegar. Romantic. Now, let's move on to the most hopeful part of your day. Dinner. You've worked yourself half to death. Your joints are screaming. Your skin is itchy. You smell like sadness. You drag yourself back into your hut and pray for one thing: a hot meal. Too bad. Welcome to dinner in medieval Europe. It might literally kill you. Food preservation doesn't exist. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, and the cold. Meat, if you have any, it's been hanging in the air for days, covered in flies, half eaten by a rat, and probably still getting served. Bread is the staple of your diet, but don't imagine a fluffy sourdough loaf. This bread is like a weapon, hard, dense, and often padded with creative ingredients like bark, acorns, sawdust, or even clay. In some years, you bulk it out with ergot, a fungus that grows on rye. It's toxic, causes hallucinations, seizures, and sometimes death. Imagine dinner that comes with a side of medieval LSD and tetanus. Vegetables? Sure, when they're in season. That means turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, roasted, or just floating like lost souls in your never-ending pot of pottage. Pottage is a never-ending stew you keep adding stuff to. Grains, weeds, old vegetables, bones if you're lucky. It's not a meal. It's a vague experience in a bowl. Dairy, milk spoiled in hours. Cheese and butter stick around longer, but they're also filled with bacteria. You eat them anyway because they're marginally better than starving. Fruit, only in the fall. Sugar, if you're rich. A pinch of cinnamon or pepper costs more than you earn in a month. For peasants, flavor is a fantasy. And don't even think about hunting. Wild animals belong to the Lord. Get caught poaching a rabbit. You might lose a hand, or your life. Yes, your dinner could get you executed. Every meal is a gamble. You eat not because you're excited, but because you don't want to faint tomorrow. You choke down your grey stew, pray it doesn't give you worms, and call it a win. Now that you've filled your stomach with lightly cursed nutrients, maybe you're ready to wind down. Not so fast. Religion runs this world, and God is always watching. In medieval Europe, faith isn't a personal belief, it's law. It controls your calendar, your meals, your marriage, your identity, and your afterlife. The church is your landlord, your boss, your school, and your news station all rolled into one. You don't read the Bible, it's in Latin. Only monks and clergy know it. You rely on the priest to tell you what God wants, and he will tell you, often. Every day is structured around prayer bells. You hear one in the morning, one at noon, and one at night. If you miss Mass, eat meat on a Friday, or have one lustful dream, it's Sin City. Eternal hellfire is a real and vivid threat. Forget therapy. Confession is your only option. Feeling anxious? Probably a demon. Have a weird dream? Better light a candle and start repenting. You give 1/10 of your income to the church, even if you barely have an income. Have a cow, they get milk. Have chickens, they get eggs. Have nothing. We're spiritually bankrupt and socially doomed. And if you speak out against the church, you're not asking questions. You're becoming a heretic, which means burning, drowning, flogging, or all three. Religion isn't optional. It's the air you breathe. Miss a ritual, and suddenly Agnes from 2 huts over is reporting you for witchcraft. Again, holidays? Yes, but they're holy days, not parties. You still go to Mass, still fast, still pray. Celebrating too hard is considered suspect. And if you're laughing too loud during a feast, expect side-eye from Brother Eustace. So you bow, you kneel, you pray. Not because you're enlightened, but because you're terrified. Of plague, of famine, of sin, of hell, of everything. And if you're a woman, you'll want to buckle up even tighter, because that spiritual pressure doubles. So, you've slogged through back-breaking labor, chewed your way through fungus-flavored bread, and survived a healing session involving blood loss and cow dung. Congrats. Now let's make things even more difficult by being born a woman in the Middle Ages. life as a medieval woman. Imagine being seen as a walking baby machine with less freedom than the family goat. Your entire existence is defined by your body, specifically what it can produce, carry, clean, or cook. From the moment you're born, you're taught one thing: serve. Serve your father, then your husband, then your children. If you're lucky, you might get to serve a convent instead. Independence, dreams, rights, that's cute. Girls marry young, like really young. We're talking 12, 13, maybe 14 if your family's feeling generous. You don't get to pick your husband. Your father does. It's not about love, it's a transaction. A dowry gets paid, a ceremony happens, and boom, you're a wife, a cook, a maid, and soon after, a mother. Childbirth, not a private hospital moment. It's terrifying, filthy, and incredibly dangerous. There's no anesthesia, no trained doctor, just your neighbor Marjorie, who's had 8 kids and thinks boiled herbs solve everything. If the baby comes out healthy, it's a miracle. If you survive it, it's a second one. And if you die during childbirth, that's just the risk of being female. Happens all the time. Once you've delivered a child, your job isn't over. Now you're responsible for keeping the baby alive, without clean water, proper nutrition, or any medical help. And by the way, you'll probably be pregnant again within a year. Your body barely has time to recover before it's thrown back into the gauntlet. Let's say you're not married. Maybe you became a nun. That's better, right? Slightly, you escape pregnancy, and if you're educated, you might even learn to read. But your life still revolves around strict obedience, silence, and prayer from sunrise to sunset. And you'll never leave the convent again. So it's a trade, freedom from childbirth, but also freedom from freedom. As for widows, society views them with suspicion. If your husband dies and you're still relatively young, people will whisper. Maybe you poisoned him. Maybe you're a witch. Maybe you want to be independent, and we can't have that. And if you're poor, things get worse. You work all day, cooking, cleaning, hauling water, weaving, spinning, nursing, raising livestock, foraging, and still managing to raise children. You don't get praise. You don't get rest. You get callous hands and a short life. Even your clothing is controlled. Show too much skin. You're immoral. Speak your mind. You're hysterical. Learn to read. Dangerous. You might get ideas. Now imagine you've done everything right. You're faithful, obedient, hardworking. Still, you live under the constant threat of accusation. Because here's the kicker. Society believes women are naturally closer to sin. More emotional, more lustful, more tempting. If anything goes wrong, a storm ruins crops, a cow dies, a child falls ill, someone will look for a woman to blame. Enter the concept of witchcraft. The church pushed hard on the idea that Satan worked through women. Did you know how to heal people with herbs? That's suspicious. Did you help deliver babies? Black magic, clearly. Did you talk back to a man in public? Now you're on thin ice. You could be accused of witchcraft for literally anything. A neighbor's milk goes sour. You get blamed. Someone has a bad dream. Must be your fault. Once accused, you're not defending yourself in court. You're defending yourself against torture until you confess to something you didn't do. If you're lucky, they just imprison you. If not, you're burned alive or drowned in a river. Either way, your odds aren't great. Being born a woman in the Middle Ages is like being set up for a lifelong game, where the rules are designed against you, and the penalty for losing is fatal. And this is all assuming you're a free woman. Let's not even get started on what happens to enslaved women, or those dragged into warfare, or the thousands caught between noblemen's greed and church doctrine. By now, you're probably wondering how people stayed sane through all this. Short answer, they didn't. Many didn't make it past their 30s. Long answer, let's talk about violence, punishment, and what law and order really looked like in medieval times. So you've managed to stay out of trouble mostly. You haven't stolen anything, You didn't question the church out loud, and your neighbor hasn't accused you of witchcraft. Yet, that's good. Because in the Middle Ages, breaking the rules came with consequences, and not the slap on the wrist kind. Justice wasn't about fairness, it was about fear. The system was designed to make an example out of you, and often it didn't matter if you were guilty. It only mattered that someone with more power decided you were. Let's say you're accused of theft. Maybe you took a loaf of bread, or someone said they saw you do it. You're arrested. You don't get a lawyer. You don't get a trial the way we know it. You get what's called a trial by ordeal. One method. You hold a red-hot iron bar and walk 3 paces. Your hand is then wrapped and left for 3 days. If it heals cleanly, you're innocent. If it festers, you're guilty. Seems objective, right? Another method. They tie you up and throw you into a river. If you float, you're guilty. Why? Because water, being pure, rejects you. If you sink, you're innocent, but you may also drown. It's a lose-lose with bonus hypothermia. And if you're found guilty, the punishment isn't jail, it's pain. Thieves might have a hand chopped off. Liars could have their tongues pierced or cut. Public humiliation was common. Stocks, pillories, being paraded around town with signs listing your sins. Not to correct behavior, but to let everyone else know what happens when you step out of line. For more serious crimes, things got much worse. Torture was often used to extract confessions. The rack stretched your limbs until joints popped. The Iron Maiden, a steel coffin with spikes inside. The wheel? You'd be tied to it, and your limbs smashed with clubs. These weren't myths. They were state-sanctioned terror. Executions were public events. Beheadings, hangings, and burnings were advertised like social gatherings. People brought their children. Vendors sold food. The idea was to scare everyone straight, through brutality and bloodshed. Even minor offenses could land you in a world of hurt. Gossip too loudly. You might be forced to wear a metal mask with a spiked bit in your mouth. Cheat on your spouse. Get branded with hot iron. Public shame was a tool, and they used it well. And if you were poor or a woman, your word meant less, much less. Justice favored the wealthy, the landowners, the clergy. If someone powerful wanted you gone, they didn't need much evidence. Just the right accusation, spoken at the wrong time. So you kept your head down. You didn't talk back. You prayed that nobody important noticed you. Because the law wasn't about right and wrong. It was about order. Maintaining it. Enforcing it. And reminding everyone where they stood. Now imagine this level of violence baked into every part of your life. Not just the justice system. This is a world where casual cruelty isn't shocking. It's expected. Let's talk warfare. The Middle Ages were full of battles. Kings fought over land. Nobles squabbled over borders. Religious crusades turned Europe into a giant battlefield. And if you were a peasant, you were caught in the middle. You didn't carry a sword, you were untrained. You had a pitchfork, maybe a club. If the village got raided, you ran. Or hid. Or got trampled. Castles sound romantic. Until you realized they were built as fortresses. Defensive strongholds with narrow staircases, arrow slits, and murder holes for pouring boiling oil on intruders. If you're living near one, it's because danger is expected. And when war came, it wasn't neat. There were no rules of engagement. Villages were burned, crops destroyed, civilians slaughtered, women assaulted, children killed or conscripted. Armies traveled like plagues, consuming everything, leaving rot behind. And even when it wasn't war season, violence still hung in the air. Bar fights could end in death. Street crime was rampant. Feuds between families could last generations. A dispute over a cow could escalate to bloodshed. Life was violent. And death? Always nearby. Let's talk mortality. In the modern world, living to 80 is normal. In medieval times, that number was fantasy. You were considered old by 40. Most people didn't get there. Infant mortality was high. Many babies didn't survive their first year. If you made it to childhood, you dodged plague, famine, and injury. Teenagers often entered adulthood already broken down by hard labor and poor nutrition. Women, as we mentioned, died frequently in childbirth. Men died in battle, in accidents for infection. Kids died from fevers, from dirty water, from diseases we now treat with over-the-counter meds. And let's not forget the big one, the Black Death. In the 14th century, the bubonic plague swept through Europe and wiped out about a third of the population. That's millions dead in just a few years. Imagine everyone on your street, your town, gone, rotting, burning, entire villages empty. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no idea what caused it. People thought it was punishment from God. Some blamed foreigners, lepers, even cats. Nothing helped. Once you got it, death came fast. Fever, vomiting, black boils, delirium. Within days, sometimes hours, your body shut down. No one could save you. Often, no one would try. And then there was famine. Crop failure could mean starvation. There were years where people boiled tree bark to make soup. Some historians report cannibalism in the worst hit areas. Death was normal, constant. You didn't fear if it came. You feared when. A toothache could become lethal. A scrape on your leg could turn septic. You watched loved ones vanish with no explanation and no ceremony. The world was brutal, and your time in it was short. Still feeling nostalgic for the good old days? Let's put the final nail in the coffin by talking about the myth of medieval romance. Because the version you know, the chivalry, the noble quests, the true love stories, that's not the reality, it's marketing. Under her influence, Russia's image transformed in the eyes of Western Europe. No longer seen as purely brutal or backward, it now radiated a curated sophistication. Her court became a beacon of elegance, learning, and culture. A monarch with one foot in Moscow and the other in Parisian philosophy salons. She modernized education, not just for elites but also for girls, a radical gesture at the time. She promoted the printing of books, the circulation of ideas. She even brought smallpox inoculation to Russia, publicly receiving the vaccine herself, in an age when many feared it could be fatal or heretical. It was an act of public bravery and scientific conviction. But for all her progress, Catherine's reign was one of persistent contradictions. She admired Enlightenment ideals, quoted Rousseau, translated Montesquieu, but never freed the serfs. In fact, she expanded serfdom, especially in newly annexed lands, binding millions more to a system she privately saw as outdated and cruel. Her reforms were often cosmetic more than structural, sweeping from the top down and designed to impress European peers, more than uplift Russia's lowest classes. Still, she brought stability, ambition, and enduring reform to a nation prone to chaos. She understood, better than most rulers, that power wasn't inherited. It was constructed, constantly managed, and never truly safe. She ruled not by divine right, but by force of will, political genius, and a relentless ability to read both people and moments. People called her many things: a usurper, a tyrant, a philosopher queen, a seductress. But above all, she was effective. When she died in 1796, Russia was larger, wealthier, more formidable than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne secured, a court admired, and an empire whose momentum would echo through history. Catherine didn't just reign, she ruled, with intellect, strategy, and an unapologetic grip on destiny. And in doing so, she became more than an empress. She became a myth. More than a crown, the woman behind the empress. For all her power, territory, and public triumph, Catherine the Great remained, at her core, a woman navigating an empire not built for her, and certainly not meant to be ruled by her. She was never supposed to wear the crown. She was German by birth, a foreigner in a land suspicious of outsiders. She came to power through a coup, not coronation. She ruled a court that didn't trust women, especially ambitious ones. And yet, she didn't just survive, she thrived. Catherine wasn't ornamental. She was a worker, a reader, a writer, a planner. Her daily routine was more grueling than glamorous. Hours of reading dense state reports, drafting foreign correspondence, editing legislation, managing ministers and courtiers who would gladly seen her fail. She governed with the endurance of a career politician and the hunger of someone who had everything to prove. And still, she felt deeply alone. She filled her world with lovers, artists, scholars, but trust remained scarce. In her memoirs, she confided that few people ever truly understood or supported her. Her son Paul became one of her deepest anxieties. She distrusted his judgment, feared his temper, and excluded him from governance, worried he would undo everything she had built. That decision created a rift so deep that she considered bypassing him in the line of succession altogether. The man who came closest to being her equal, Grigory Potemkin, evolved from passionate lover to platonic partner. Their bond outlasted desire, became a collaboration of minds. When he died in 1791, Catherine was devastated. The woman who had withstood rebellions, coups, and the endless chess game of power finally cracked, if only privately. But Catherine understood legacy. She crafted it like a statesman and a playwright. She posed for portraits that showed her as Athena, as a mother, as a monarch. She presented herself as the embodiment of Russian destiny, even if, behind the image, was someone who had endured rejection, scandal, betrayal, and loss, and kept moving forward. When she died, history didn't just remember her, it crowned her. Not with the title she gave herself, but one earned by decades of dominance, the Great. Not because she was perfect, not because she was kind, but because she seized power in a world that told women to sit quietly and smile, and rewrote the rules in her own hand. She didn't inherit greatness, she engineered it. Everything about the burial whispered royalty, the jade, the craftsmanship, the reverent care with which the body had been laid to rest. And yet, no name, no glyphs, no inscriptions carved to announce her to eternity. It was one of the richest female burials ever discovered in Miss America, and yet it spoke only in riddles. No dates, no titles, just red dust, green stone, and enduring silence. She was buried not in gold, but in powdered cinnabar, a toxic, luminous red that clung to every surface like memory. It coated the stone sarcophagus, the chamber walls, the ritual offerings, and the delicate bones of the woman herself. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. In Maya belief, red was sacred. It symbolized life, blood, rebirth, sacrifice, the very pulse of the universe. Cinnabar, made from crushed mercury sulfide, wasn't just visually striking, it was spiritually dangerous. To bathe a body in it was to mark that person as not merely royal, but divine. It was a transformation, death not as an ending, but as an apotheosis. The archaeologists who opened the sealed tomb beneath Temple Exoli in Palenque in 1994 gave her a name, the Red Queen. And the name stuck, buried in silence, drenched in power. Unlike other Maya tombs, this one had remained untouched by looters, time, or the elements. It had been deliberately hidden, sealed beneath stone, and obscured from view, as if the world wasn't meant to find her, or not yet. She was not meant to be remembered by words. She was meant to be remembered through ritual. Her burial wasn't grand in size, but in symbolism. Her skull rested on a jaguar pelt, a sacred emblem of the underworld and royal authority. At her side lay jade necklaces, obsidian blades, and bone needles, objects that spoke of ceremony, status, and spiritual passage. Everything in the tomb had been chosen with precision. This was not wealth on display, it was a cosmic passport. Among the most striking finds was a jade funerary mask, delicate and mosaic, shaped to mirror the contours of her face. In contrast to the gleaming gold death masks of Egypt, this one was subtle, personal, powerful. It wasn't about preserving beauty, it was about preserving the soul. To the Maya, death was not an end, it was a transition. The soul would descend into Xibalba, the underworld, a vast, layered, and perilous realm, and needed both spiritual tools and symbolic armor to survive the journey. The Red Queen's tomb was a map for the afterlife, written not in script, but in jade, shell, obsidian, and blood-red dust. Who was she? This is the heart of the mystery. The richness of her burial, the proximity of her tomb to the Temple of the Inscriptions, just steps away from the resting place of Kinich-Janab Pekal, known today as Pekal the Great, suggested a deep connection. Some speculated she was his queen, a woman named Sakbi-Urjo, who married into the dynasty and bore Pekal's heirs. Others proposed she was Sat Kuk, his powerful mother who ruled Palenka's regent before Pekal came of age. Still others offered more esoteric theories. Perhaps a high priestess or a royal ancestor whose name was intentionally kept from history, preserved instead in ritual and symbolism. The strongest theory remains that she was Sakbi-Urjo, queen, consort, and mother of kings. A woman of noble birth, married into Palenk's ruling family at a young age, who stood beside one of the most celebrated kings in Maya history during the golden age of the city. And then there's the cinnabar. Only 2 burials at Palenk were found with such heavy cinnabar saturation, Pekal the Great and the Red Queen. It seems unlikely this was coincidence. In a world where everything carried meaning, from the placement of a skull to the number of jade beads, the shared use of red dust was a kind of spiritual fingerprint, a bond that transcended names. A tomb without a name. DNA tests were conducted in hopes of confirming a link between Pekal and the Red Queen. The results? Inconclusive. There was no direct maternal relationship, which ruled out her being his mother. But there was nothing to disprove that she could have been his wife. And in Maya culture, marriage was not about blood, but alliance. She could still have been his most intimate and sacred counterpart. The lack of a name may not have been a loss to time, but an intentional erasure. Perhaps her identity was considered too sacred, too divine, to be spoken. Perhaps the ritual itself was meant to make her more than a name, to let her become a symbol of death, power, and transcendence. A kind of Maya goddess, fashioned not in myth, but in ritual. She was a queen, a mother, a priestess, or all 3. But above all, she was a woman buried not in silence, but in ceremony. Every object in that tomb, from the jaguar pelt to the obsidian blade, whispered that she was more than mortal. The mystery that endures. Today, the Red Queen's tomb remains one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the Americas. Not because of what we know, but because of what we still don't. Her story is told not through written histories, but through color, texture, and symbolism. Her silence is haunting, her presence undeniable. And in that way, she mirrors others like her in history. Women who wielded power behind veils, who were erased from books, but remembered in stone and ritual. Like Catherine the Great, she ruled a world not designed for her, and in death, she defied its limits. 2 women. 2 thrones, one of marble, one of limestone. 2 crowns, one gilded, one masked. And 2 legacies written in silence and spectacle. The Red Queen did not leave behind a name, but in that absence, she became eternal. In Maya cosmology, the soul lived on not through monuments, but through ritual, symbol, and the whispers of the earth. And so, the Red Queen remains suspended, somewhere between legend and truth, between name and myth. A woman who ruled not through carved stone, but through scarlet and silence. But to understand the Red Queen, we must first understand the world she came from. A civilization of powerful women. The ancient Maya world was not simply a stage for kings and warlords. It was a landscape where royal women wielded real influence, sometimes from behind the throne, sometimes on it. In a society where lineage was sacred and bloodlines were everything, women were not ornamental. They were essential. Politics for the Maya was often a family affair, and dynastic power was a dance of alliances, marriages, and bloodlines. Royal women were diplomats, princesses and power brokers. They sponsored temples, led rituals, and in times of crisis, ruled outright. Consider Satkuk, the mother of Kinichijanab Pekal. When Pelenk's throne stood empty, she didn't just hold it for her son. She claimed it. For 3 years she ruled in her own name, issuing royal edicts, overseeing construction projects, and maintaining control of the kingdom until Pekal was old enough to rule. Without her, the so-called golden age of Pelenk may never have dawned. And Satkuk was no anomaly. Across the Maya world, from Naxxalan to Naranjo to Calakmul, glyphs and murals show women performing major ceremonies, engaging in diplomatic negotiations, and standing at the heart of Maya ritual life. They wore the same elaborate headdresses as kings. They were portrayed on stela, arms outstretched in sacrifice, eyes fixed on gods. Some led armies. Others forged empires with marriage and sacred bloodlines. Their names were remembered until colonialism and conquests swept them into silence, rewriting the Red Queen's legacy. Through this lens, the Red Queen begins to take shape, not as an anomaly, but as a continuation of this powerful tradition. Her name may be lost, but her burial speaks louder than any inscription. The cinnabar, the jade, the chamber hidden beside Pekal's own. Everything about her final resting place suggests someone who mattered, not as an accessory to power, but as a pillar of it. Her jade mask, cool and delicate, was more than funerary art. It was an icon of identity, designed not only to honor her in death, but to preserve her presence in the eyes of the gods. Her bloodline, now invisible to us, may have been the glue that held Pelenk's royal house together. In Maya civilization, queens were not simply consorts. They were keepers of sacred lineage, voices in the ceremonial world, and often bridges between gods and men. The Red Queen may be nameless to us, but in her world, she was never voiceless. A temple for a queen, and she wasn't just buried with treasures. She was buried in architecture, rich with meaning, layered with cosmology, built with intention. Her tomb was hidden within Temple Xrmi, one of the more modest pyramids in the heart of Pelenk. Yet its location is telling, just steps away from the towering temple of the inscriptions, where Pekal the Great was entombed in grandeur. Maya temples were not arranged at random. Their orientation, placement, and construction were cosmic decisions tied to astrology, myth, and royal legacy. Temple Xrmi rises quietly, a shadow to its grander sibling, but it guards something more intimate. The tomb was built deep within the pyramid, accessible only by a narrow, steep staircase that descends like a spiral into the underworld. Entering it feels symbolic, a descent into Xibalba, the Maya land of the dead. The chamber is small, austere, its walls bare. No murals, no glyphs, just stone and silence. But this quiet may have been intentional, a sacred space designed not to be seen by the living, but to guide the dead through transformation. At the center sits the sarcophagus, carved from limestone and bathed in cinnabar. Unlike Pekal's lid, etched with the image of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's tomb is focused inward. The body, the color, the transition. The tomb is aligned east to west, a spiritual axis mimicking the sun's daily journey from birth to death. Every element, the sealed chamber, the steep descent, the silence, suggests a ritual space meant not for mourning, but for ascension. This was the grave. It was a gateway, crossing into the afterlife. To the Maya, death was never an end. It was a threshold, a portal into the multi-layered underworld of Xibalba, a dangerous, shadowed realm ruled by gods of death and trial. The soul didn't drift gently into peace. It fought. It endured. And only those properly buried, richly armed, and cosmically aligned could make the journey safely. The Red Queen had everything she needed. She was wrapped in cinnabar, a shroud of rebirth. She was adorned in jade, the breath of the gods. She was surrounded by ritual objects, obsidian blades, bone needles, ceramic vessels likely once filled with maize, cacao, poke, or incense, spiritual sustenance for the long road ahead. The presence of sharp instruments, stingray spines, obsidian shards, may hint at auto-sacrifice rituals. These tools could have represented rites she performed in life, or rituals reenacted at her death to energize her soul. To the Maya, sacrifice was currency, an offering of blood for balance, a trade for divine favor. Most sacred of all was her jade funerary mask, carefully tiled to mirror her features. The Maya believed that the face was the mirror of the soul, and in death, the gods had to recognize that face. The mask was not a decoration. It was identity armor, meant to preserve her spirit across dimensions. Her burial was not a goodbye. It was a coronation into eternity. Eternal, not forgotten in death, the Red Queen entered myth. No name, no voice, just symbols, blood-red powder, and jade breath. And yet, through the architecture, the objects, and the cosmology, we begin to hear her speak, not in glyphs, but in ritual language. She was not erased. She was elevated. Her tomb is not just one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in the Americas. It is a monument to Maya womanhood, to sacred power, and to the belief that death is merely a path towards something greater. In her silence, the Red Queen tells us, I mattered, I endured, I transformed. The Red Queen, draped in the deep red of blood, entombed within a pyramid, and honored with sacred offerings, was not simply laid to rest. She was being prepared for rebirth. Not as a mortal, but as a being entwined with the sacred rhythms of the cosmos. Her burial wasn't an end, but the dawn of a legend. Just a few steps from her final resting place stands one of Mesoamerica's most famous tombs, that of Janap Pal, known simply as Pal the Great. His grand burial inside the Temple of the Inscriptions is celebrated for its scale, artistry, and profound spiritual symbolism. Yet what makes the Red Queen's tomb extraordinary is not just what was inside, but where it was found. Her sarcophagus was hidden within Temple 3, directly beside Pal's monument. In Palenque, a city where every temple's location followed cosmic order, this proximity was deliberate, a message carved in stone. Many scholars believe the Red Queen was Zapu Au, Pal's queen and trusted consort. Though her tomb bears no inscriptions, the parallels between their burials are striking. Both wrapped in cinnabar, both entombed in pyramids, both buried with jade, and both treated with great reverence. Their rituals mirror one another as if two halves of a sacred story. Pal's sarcophagus lid famously depicts him descending the underworld tree, a cosmic scene of death and rebirth. The Red Queen's tomb is simpler, lacking such imagery, but its meaning lies in their pairing. If Pal symbolized the sun's nightly journey through the underworld to rise again, then the Red Queen may have embodied the moon, the feminine force tracing its own mysterious path across the sky. Together, they represent a cosmic duality, masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, order and ritual. In Maya thought, rulership was never solitary, it was relational. Cosmic harmony demanded balance, a balance reflected in the royal court. By placing the Red Queen beside Pal, the Maya preserved not just a marriage, but a cosmic partnership. Their closeness in death may reflect their roles in life. A queen not behind, but beside her king, sharing not just power, but legacy. In their tombs, they speak without words, two souls wrapped in cinnabar and stone, joined for eternity in one of history's most sacred silences. Though her name has faded over time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures not as a forgotten relic, but as one of the ancient world's most enigmatic and powerful women. Her tomb, sealed for more than 1,300 years, whispers through the ages, inviting questions that grow louder with each discovery. She is a mystery you may never fully solve. No glyph carves her name, no stele tells her story. Yet the care in her burial, the richness of her offerings, and the symbolism of her blood-red bones speak volumes. She was more than a wife or consort. She was a woman of true influence, spiritual power, and royal blood. Today, the Red Queen challenges our assumptions. She reminds us that Maya women were not silent observers. They led rituals, governed cities, and shaped dynasties. While kings like Pal have long held the spotlight, the Red Queen's resurgence shows that power did not belong to men alone. It flowed through mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her legacy is more than the treasures she left behind. It is the conversation she has ignited among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Every jade bead, every layer of cinnabar, every architectural choice in the temple speaks with intention. This woman mattered. And perhaps the most extraordinary part of her story is what we still don't know. The Red Queen teaches us that history is not just a collection of facts. It's a living puzzle, a shared human desire to connect with the past. Her legacy continues to unfold. Wrapped in red, the color of life and sacrifice, blood and rebirth. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, now stares back at us through science, art, and wonder. Nameless, but not voiceless. Mysterious, but never forgotten. She may have ruled a kingdom in life, but in death, she rules something greater, our imagination. Her tomb sealed in stone, her story written in silence, and yet somehow she still speaks. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vibrant neighborhood of Coyoacán, then a small village on the outskirts of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the Casa Azul, the Blue House, was filled with color, contradictions, and quiet strength. It would become a sanctuary, a battleground, and later a museum dedicated to one of the 20th century's most iconic artists. Frida was the third of 4 daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Mathilde Calderon, devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish heritage. Her parents were opposites. Guillermo was reserved and intellectual, while Mathilde was deeply religious and emotionally distant. Frida inherited her father's introspection and artistic sensibility, along with her mother's fierce resilience. As a child, Frida was imaginative, outspoken, and bold. She read voraciously and asked questions that many adults prefer to avoid. At the age of 6, she contracted polio, leaving her right leg thinner and weaker than the left. A physical difference she tried to hide beneath long skirts, but never allowed to stifle her spirit. The illness confined her to bed for months and isolated her from other children. During that time, she grew close to her father, who encouraged her to stay active, ride bicycles, and keep her mind sharp. Unlike most girls of her era, Frida did not dream of marriage or homemaking. She aspired to become a doctor and enrolled at the prestigious National Preparatory School in Mexico City at age 15, one of only a few girls admitted. There she stood out not only for her intelligence, but also for her rebellious wit, radical ideas, and unique style. She joined a group of young intellectuals known as the Cachuchas, who debated philosophy, literature, and politics. Frida was drawn to revolution and ideas that challenged tradition. Even in those early years, before the bus accident that would forever change her body, and before the fame that would define her legacy, Frida Kahlo was already painting her identity onto the world, sharp-edged, unapologetic, and far too large to fit into anyone else's expectations. She wasn't simply growing up in Coyoacán, she was preparing to remake herself completely. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life changed forever, dividing her existence into 2 distinct parts: the girl she once was and the woman she was forced to become. That afternoon after school, she climbed aboard a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomes Arias. They were joking, teasing, and perhaps even arguing. Frida never did anything halfway. But in a sudden, tragic moment, the bus collided with a streetcar, instantly shattering her future into chaos, pain, and silence. The accident was brutal. The streetcar crushed the bus against a wall, splintering its wood and throwing passengers about. Frida was pierced by an iron handrail that entered her left hip and exited through her pelvis. She suffered fractures in 3 places along her spine. Her right leg was shattered, her foot dislocated, and her collarbone, ribs, and shoulder were broken or dislocated. Her abdomen was also pierced. At just 18 years old, she was gravely injured. A man covered her with a borrowed coat, and someone else noticed that her body shimmered, not from blood, but from gold powder that had spilled from a pouch during the crash, dusting her broken form like sparkling ash. She was rushed to a Red Cross hospital, where she underwent many surgeries over several months. Immobilized in a full body cast, confined to her back, writhing with infection and uncertainty, the dream of becoming a doctor slipped further away with every day that passed. Yet in this stillness, something inside her awakened. Her father gave her paintbrushes. Her mother set up a special easel above her bed, and a mirror hung from the canopy so she could see herself. There, lying broken in plaster and pain, Frida began to paint. What started as a distraction soon grew to an obsession. Her first paintings were self-portraits, because she was all she had. But these were not acts of vanity, they were acts of survival. Though the crash had shattered her body, it opened a door into her inner world, a door that led to a surreal exploration of pain and identity that would come to define her art. The girl who once wanted to heal others now sought to heal herself, one brushstroke at a time. Confined in plaster and steel, struggling with her battered body, Frida found in painting a new language, intensely personal, brutally honest, and often difficult to face, which was exactly the point. She didn't paint delicate flowers or serene landscapes. Instead, she painted her own pain, physical, emotional, and existential. Her early works, mostly small paintings on tin or wood inspired by Mexican devotional art called retablos, turned inward. Her body was the canvas, and her feelings became a sacred altar. She portrayed herself split, pierced, and bleeding. In one piece, she was nailed like a modern martyr. In another, she floated in a barren scene, tethered to a broken column symbolizing her fractured spine. Her images showed her crying, broken, even decapitated, but never passive, always watching. Her pain was raw and unfiltered, painted with defiance, beauty, and sometimes humor. Each work reclaimed her body, her experience, and her identity in a world that often tried to define her. But Frida was not only telling her story, she was inventing a new visual language, blending Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical imagery, and symbolism. Her paintings became dreamlike dissections of her soul, framed in rich cultural and mythic colors. When she was finally able to walk again, though still in pain, she was no longer the girl who dreamed of medicine. She was an artist unlike any other, one who transformed her greatest tragedy into a powerful creative force. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint her pain. She made the world confronted, turning suffering into a sacred form of self-expression. In 1928, while still recovering and painting at age 21, she met Diego Rivera, the man who would profoundly impact her life. Rivera, 20 years her senior, was already Mexico's most famous painter, a towering figure known for his grand, politically charged murals depicting the Mexican people's story. Frida admired his work, and when she boldly asked him, "Do I have talent?" he replied without hesitation, "Yes, and not just out of kindness." He recognized in her a rare, raw voice, full of rage, irony, pain, and beauty. Their relationship ignited, intense, creative, and consuming. Frida once said she had two major accidents in life. One when the streetcar hit her, and the other was meeting Diego. They married in 1929, an unlikely pairing. Diego was a large, famous, unfaithful man. Frida was sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, and already reliant on a cane. Her parents likened their union to a pairing of an elephant and a dove. Their marriage was passionate but turbulent. Diego supported her artistic growth, but was notoriously unfaithful, even with Frida's own sister. Heartbroken, Frida had lovers herself, both men and women, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, but remarried a year later on new terms. Frida kept her independence, home, money, and name. This second marriage was less about romance and more about creative partnership and mutual respect. Despite the betrayals, Diego remained a powerful presence in her life, both challenging and wounding her, but also believing in her as an artist and revolutionary woman who redefined painting. Together, they were far from peaceful, but undeniably legendary. During the 1930s, Frida traveled with Diego across the US as he worked on murals in San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. These experiences exposed her to American industrialism, wealth, and capitalism's contradictions, deepening her political discomfort. A proud Mexican nationalist and committed communist, Frida's admiration for indigenous culture only grew stronger as she witnessed the stark inequalities of the Great Depression-era United States. In letters to her family, Frida often mocked the materialism and obsession with appearances she saw in American culture. She longed for the grit, color, and contradictions of Mexico. While Diego Rivera was busy painting massive murals on factory walls, Frida focused on smaller, quieter revolutions through deeply personal works on tin canvas. Her style became distinct, sharp, surreal, emotional, and intimate. It was during this period that she created some of her most famous self-portraits. Frida didn't paint herself out of vanity, she painted to survive. Her identity became the setting of her work. With her body constantly suffering from pain caused by the accident, numerous surgeries, and a miscarriage in Detroit, she turned inward. Her portraits depicted herself as bleeding, fragmented, and exposed, but her expression was always calm, direct, and unapologetic. One of her most powerful paintings, Henry Ford Hospital, shows her lying on a hospital bed, tears streaming, surrounded by symbolic objects like a fetus, a snail, medical tools, and a cracked pelvis. The work was raw, graphic, and deeply emotional, a canvas that bled truth. Back in Mexico, Frida engaged deeply in leftist politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky into their home while he lived in exile. Frida wore traditional indigenous dresses, not merely as fashion, but as political and cultural statements. Her art was inseparable from her beliefs. Her identity, body, and ideology were intertwined. While Rivera painted murals about revolution, Frida depicted its human cost: bodies broken, minds on fire, and the self constantly confronting itself. In exile and amid illness, she became more than a painter of pain. She became a painter of resistance. Returning to Mexico in the late 1930s, Frida was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She had transformed into a powerful artist, her work filled with raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and a strong cultural identity. Her home, Casa Azul in Coyoacán, became a sanctuary bursting with color and contradictions. Bright cobalt walls, yellow trim, Aztec statues in the garden, and animals roaming freely. The house was an extension of her imagination, mixing tradition with rebellion, elegance with earthiness. She surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, folk art, and revolutionary literature. Dressed in bold Tehuana dresses, flowers in her hair, she painted amid the scent of copal incense and mariachi music drifting from the streets. This was a period of creative flourishing. Her paintings grew more intricate, symbolic, and political. The two Fridas captured her divided self, one in European dress with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous attire, strong and composed. This visual autobiography spoke of love, loss, and heritage. In 1939, Frida exhibited in Paris, where renowned artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky admired her unique style. But even among surrealists, Frida was different. When Andra Breton tried to claim her as one of their own, she resisted, saying, "They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." Her art portrayed Mexico not as a romantic postcard, but as a vibrant, living country she loved. Her work was rich with symbols, skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood, honoring indigenous roots while revealing the violence of Mexico's past and present. Despite her artistic strength, Frida's health steadily declined. Chronic pain, infections, and numerous surgeries became daily struggles. Yet she continued to paint, often propped up in bed, her torso bound by corsets, her hands clenched tightly around brushes. Returning to Mexico wasn't about resting. It was about reclaiming power through art, politics, and an unyielding embrace of herself. Throughout the 1940s, Frida's body deteriorated further. Her spine worsened, her right leg was frequently infected, and she underwent over 30 surgeries, often in painful succession. At times, she was bedridden for months, immobilized by casts or traction devices pulling her bones apart. Still, she painted. Each work became an act of release and defiance. Her paintings grew darker and more unyielding. In the broken column, she depicted herself split down the middle, pierced with nails, with a cracked ionic column replacing her spine. Yet her face remained stoic, her gaze unwavering. Pain was no longer just a subject. It was her constant companion, antagonist, muse. Her political voice also grew louder. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in protests, wrote passionate letters, and condemned imperialism and injustice. When she could no longer walk, she showed up in a wheelchair, defiantly holding signs and shouting slogans. In 1953, Frida had her first solo exhibition in Mexico, long overdue recognition of her work. Though her health was fragile and doctors said she couldn't attend, she did what only Frida could. Arriving by ambulance, she was carried on a stretcher and placed in the gallery's center on her hospital bed. Dressed in traditional attire and surrounded by her paintings, she welcomed guests with tequila, laughter, and the fierce fire still glowing in her eyes. Her final paintings were both innocent and haunting. In Martyrdom will give health to the sick. She painted herself wearing a steel corset, held by the hands of Marx, casting off symbols of oppression. Her last known painting was a still life of sliced watermelons, with the words, "Viva la vida," long live life. Even facing death, she remained defiant, joyful, and political. Frida Kahlo's last portraits were not merely self-portraits. They were acts of revolution, born of pain, yet always celebrating life. On July 13, 1954, at age 47, Frida died in the very home where she was born, Casa Azul in Coyote. The official cause was a pulmonary embolism, but those closest whispered of a deeper truth. She was not only ill, but also exhausted from decades of pain, surgeries, and battling her own body. Just days earlier, weak and wheelchair-bound, she had insisted on attending a protest against the CIA-backed coup in Guatemala, her fist raised high. Revolution was her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was brief but poignant. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Frida's funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Arts, Mexico's most prestigious cultural institution. Frida's body, draped in the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, was surrounded by friends, family, artists, and fellow revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was inconsolable, calling her the greatest love of his life, even though his betrayals had nearly broken her. But after her death, something remarkable happened. Frida Kahlo refused to fade away. Initially, her name was only spoken quietly within art circles. Her work was hard to classify, too political for surrealists and too surreal for traditionalists. Gradually, her image, story, and fierce spirit began to resonate more widely. During the 1970s and 1980s, feminist scholars and activists revived forgotten voices, and Frida's grew louder. She became more than just a painter. She became a symbol of transforming pain into beauty, of feminism born through resistance, of Mexican identity embraced proudly, of queerness, disability, revolution, and authenticity. Her face, with its distinctive unibrow, penetrating gaze, and flowers in her hair, became iconic. Her home was turned into a museum, her diary treated like a sacred text, and her paintings now hung in the world's most prestigious museums. Though Frida had spent much of her life overshadowed by Diego Rivera, in death she stepped fully into the spotlight. She left behind more than paintings. She left a mirror, daring us all to look not with pity or fear, but with fierce passion. Today, Frida Kahlo's image is everywhere, printed on t-shirts, painted on murals, made into dolls, memes, posters, and symbols. Her signature unibrow, flower crowns, and direct stare are instantly recognizable. But what makes her legacy powerful is not just that people know her face, it's that they understand the truth behind it. Frida never aimed for perfection. She defied labels. She was unconventional and unapologetic about it. In a world demanding flawlessness, she gave us realness, raw, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, and full of contradictions. She celebrated what made her different. Her disability, her queerness, her politics, her culture, and turned those into art that crossed borders and generations. She has become more than an artist. She is a global icon of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, and creative resistance. For queer communities, she's a fearless bisexual figure who lived openly at a time that demanded silence. For women, she is a reminder that power doesn't need permission. For disabled artists, she proves that pain can fuel creativity instead of stopping it. And for Mexico, she is a reclaimed daughter, fierce, folkloric, and forever part of the nation's soul. Her paintings, once dismissed as too strange or too personal, are now among the most celebrated in the world. Works like the two Fridas, self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, and the broken column aren't just seen, they are deeply felt by anyone who has ever suffered and turned that suffering into something sacred. Frida lived on the margins and brought them center stage. She embraced contradictions. Communists who wore gold, a woman betrayed who loved again, a body broken, but a soul unbreakable. And through it all, she painted not just with colors, but with fierce conviction. Frida Kahlo never asked to be a symbol. She simply told the truth about herself, and in doing so, spoke for millions who had never seen themselves reflected in art before. Now, when we see her face, we see courage, color, resistance. We see Frida, not gone but immortal. Now, dim the lights once more, let your breath soften, and feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort. The night stories have been told, the embers have cooled, and the ancient rhythms pulse softly beneath your skin. Remember, sleep is not just rest. It's a bridge to dreams, a quiet healing, a gentle gift from the earth itself. Good night, and may your dreams carry you softly until the dawn. So far, you've survived squalor, starvation, social chaos, and possibly a goat-related incident. Just when you think things can't get any worse, bam. Violence makes its dramatic entrance. Loud, bloody, and by medieval standards, perfectly reasonable. Spoiler alert. The Middle Ages were not a peaceful era. Law and order meant hoping your local lord didn't wake up in a foul mood. Violence wasn't an exception, it was a lifestyle. It was everywhere, at home in the streets, on the battlefield, during church arguments, and even while queuing for bread. Crime was common, punishment was savage, and justice. More of a grotesque theatre production than actual protection. Steal a loaf of bread, say goodbye to your hand. Accused of lying, get ready for a pierced tongue. Caught gossiping too much, enter the scold's bridle, a charming metal mask with a mouth bar, designed to correct your sauce. And heaven help you if you're accused of something serious, like heresy, theft, or witchcraft. Because naturally, proving your innocence involved pain. Welcome to trial by ordeal. In one version, you stick your hand into boiling water to pull out a stone. If your hand miraculously doesn't fester within 3 days, congrats. You're innocent. Another method, they toss you into a river. If you sink, you're innocent, but also very dead. If you float, guilty, and probably headed for execution. Basically, it's like a medieval game show, but with no prizes, and the host is out to kill you. Execution, by the way, was a full-blown community event. Public hangings, beheadings, and burnings were crowd pleasers. People showed up with snacks. Think of it as grim, medieval Netflix. Domestic abuse, perfectly normal. Husbands were not only allowed but expected to discipline wives and children. Street brawls were part of the daily routine. You could get beaten up just for glancing sideways at a noble's horse. And war? A constant backdrop. Whether it was local grudges, land squabbles, or holy crusades, someone was always marching off to stab someone else. for glory, faith, or just boredom. But here's the thing, violence wasn't a breakdown of medieval society. It was society. Everyone knew life was cheap, justice was a coin toss, and your neighbor might bash your skull over pig ownership. So keep your head down, watch your back, and never trust anyone holding a club. At this point, if you've endured lice, leeches, filthy clothes, and a public disembowelment scare, there's one last chapter left in your medieval saga: death. Unglamorous, often premature, and pretty much inevitable. If you were still upright and breathing past 40, you were a local legend, maybe even called the Old One. Not a compliment, more a statistical anomaly. Let's do the math. Average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years. That figure's dragged down by a brutal reality. Nearly half of all children didn't live past age 5. Disease, hunger, or a bad winter could wipe out a whole generation. No vaccines, no antibiotics, just prayers and terrible luck. Survive that gauntlet, and you'd hit adulthood already bent and weary. By 25, your joints ached like creaky monastery doors, and your teeth, fingers, and general will to live might have already started dropping off. Women had it especially rough. Childbirth was one of the deadliest risks they faced. No epidurals, no trained doctors, just hot water, straw, a prayer, and someone whispering comfort while you bled out. For men, death came via farming accidents, infected wounds, neighborly beatings, or the occasional ill-fated crusade. Even a casual walk to the market could end badly if you ran into a mugger or a bored tax collector. And let's not forget the big-name killers, the plague, turning whole cities into graveyards overnight, or famine, which slowly drained the life out of entire villages, or just dumb luck, like accidentally eating moldy grain and spending your last hours hallucinating and screaming at the ceiling. Funerals, only if you were lucky. Most bodies were buried fast and cheap to prevent the spread of disease. No embalming, no fancy caskets, just a dirt hole, a muttered prayer, and a pile of earth, if you were lucky enough to find room in the churchyard. So yes, medieval life was nasty, short, and stalked by death in every form imaginable. Retirement wasn't a thing. You just stopped showing up. And speaking of quitting, let's close the book on the medieval dream. How's your day been? You woke up in grime, relieved yourself in a bucket, pretended to brush your teeth, almost passed out from hunger, worked your spine into submission, endured itchy wool, begged not to get the plague, and narrowly avoided execution for squirrel ownership. Welcome to a typical day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? You might want to rethink that. The romantic version of the Middle Ages, knights in shining armor, fair maidens in towers, glorious battles, and candlelit feasts, is a fantasy. In reality, the medieval world was rough, unjust, and filthy. Social hierarchy ruled everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congrats. You had a slightly better chance of surviving the week, but one dodgy soup could still take you out with dysentery. Even the nobles weren't immune to the misery. Their castles were cold, drafty stone boxes full of fleas, smoke, and politically convenient marriages. A brutal life, lightly laughed through, sure. Maybe you had a fur cloak slung around your shoulders and a goblet of warm spiced wine in hand. But don't let that fool you into thinking it was a life of luxury. There was still a 50% chance you'd die in some back alley skirmish, or because you stepped on a splinter that got infected and took your leg. Simpler times, not so much. The medieval world didn't do easy. It did relentless. Everything took longer. Everything hurt more. Even the simple act of chewing could go sideways if you were missing half your teeth or accidentally bit into a rock-hard crust. From childbirth to cold weather, everything came with strings, and they were usually soaked in suffering. Daily life wasn't built for comfort. It was survival, plain and punishing. And if you ever found a rare sliver of quiet time to think, to dream, to imagine something better, well, tough luck. Because what could you really do with those dreams? There was no upward mobility, no safety net, no scrolling WebMD to ask, what's this weird rush, and should I be worried? You were born, lived, toiled, and died within a 10-mile radius of your village. And most of that time, you were just trying not to starve or get stabbed over firewood. And yet, here's the part that truly defies logic. People still laughed. They sang bawdy songs, told scandalous stories, danced at festivals, fell in love, gossiped by the well, and made meaning out of the mess. Not because life was good, it emphatically was not, but because humans are, if nothing else, maddeningly stubborn in their pursuit of joy. Even in the grimmest chapters of history, people carved out space for music and mirth. They lit candles in the dark. So tonight, when you climb into a clean, cozy bed, surrounded by central heating, flushable toilets, antibiotics, and relatively low odds of rat-borne plagues, maybe take a moment to whisper a quiet thank you to science, to progress, and to your ancestors, those grimy, unwashed, gloriously gritty survivors who battled famine, filth, and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. From Sophie to Sovereign, the rise of Catherine the Great. Before she became one of history's most formidable empresses, Catherine the Great was just Sophie. Born in 1729 with the full name Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst. Try fitting that on a business card. She was the daughter of a minor German prince and a fiercely ambitious mother. Her little duchy in Pomerania offered more trees than power, and politically, it didn't register much beyond a polite shrug. But Sophie had something no title could bestow. A razor-sharp intellect, magnetic charm, and a slow-burning hunger for something more. Greatness, maybe. Certainly something larger than the world she'd been handed. Her childhood wasn't exactly a warm and cozy affair. Her mother, Johanna, was cool, calculating, and completely absorbed in social climbing. Sophie's father, a military man, was more a ghost than a guide. So from a young age, Sophie learned the fine art of survival, how to obey just enough, how to read a room before speaking, how to be underestimated. She read everything she could get her hands on, became fluent in multiple languages, and quickly mastered the subtle politics of existing quietly but strategically. When Empress Elizabeth of Russia began searching Europe for a suitable bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she wanted someone foreign, and therefore easier to control, noble but not threatening, and preferably pliable. Sophie ticked all the boxes. She had aristocratic blood, a well-trained demeanor, and a lover in faith, which she would soon be required to ditch. At the tender age of 14, Sophie was summoned to Russia, arriving in icy street Petersburg in 1744 wearing a diplomatic smile, clothes far too light for the brutal Russian cold. Her mother treated the marriage as a power play. Sophie, however, saw something bigger, an empire to conquer, not with swords but with strategy. She converted to Russian Orthodoxy, changing her name to Catherine, Ekaterina Alexeyevna. It wasn't just a symbolic act. It was the burning of bridges, the severing of past identities, the first step into a life she would carve out with sheer will. No one watching that pale, fur-draped teenager would have guessed she'd become revolutionary ruler. But Catherine wasn't in Russia to be a pawn. She was there to become a queen. A crown that felt like chains. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter wasn't the romantic leap into royalty she might have imagined. It was more like being locked in a very cold, very uncomfortable political cage. Peter, the heir to the Russian throne, was not exactly Prince Charming. He was awkward, emotionally stunted, and borderline obsessed with toy soldiers. He preferred staging imaginary battles over showing any interest in his wife, or in governing an empire. Some sources even claim he didn't consummate the marriage for years, focusing instead on imitating Frederick the Great and sulking over how much he hated everything Russian. Catherine, by contrast, embraced her adopted country. She studied the language, steeped herself in its rituals, read Russian history like it was her survival guide. She was determined to belong. Peter was determined to escape. Their incompatibility wasn't just a personal inconvenience, it was political dynamite. The Russian court was a brutal, backstabbing arena. Empress Elizabeth still ruled, but her health was failing. Everyone smelled a succession crisis. Catherine was monitored constantly. Her letters read, "Friendship scrutinized, every smile and frown recorded by someone whispering behind a curtain." She couldn't trust her husband and her mother, still acting as a foreign agent, or even her servants. In this environment, trust was suicidal. So Catherine adapted. Quietly, skillfully, she built friendships with military men, charmed scholars, and carefully cultivated an image of quiet competence. A striking contrast to Peter's erratic grants and foreign loyalties. In private, Catherine devoured Enlightenment philosophy, Voltaire, Montesquieu, the works. She wasn't just learning how to rule, she was crafting a blueprint for a very different kind of Russia. But she had a problem. As long as Peter was alive, she was stuck in limbo. A clever woman chained to a fool with a crown. So she waited, and watched, and planned. A bloodless coup, and a crown won by wit. In 1762, after nearly 20 years of living in Peter's shadow, Catherine struck. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Peter was now officially Tsar Peter I. His reign, however, was a masterclass in self-destruction. Within months, he managed to alienate the church, insult the nobility, infuriate the army, and cozy up to Prussia, Russia's longtime rival. He reversed popular reforms, mocked the Orthodox clergy, and talked openly about dumping Catherine for his mistress. The court, already wary of him, turned frigid. The army, angry and quietly loyal to Catherine. The public, outraged at this foreign-born ruler who seemed to scorn everything Russian. Catherine knew it was now or never. In July of that same year, while Peter vacationed at his palace, she made her move. With the support of the military and her lover, the dashing Gregory Orlov, she rode through Street Petersburg in full imperial regalia. The Imperial Guard declared her Empress Catherine due on the spot. Peter, blindsided and abandoned by his allies, surrendered without a fight. Days later, he was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The official cause? A bizarre-sounding hemorrhoidal colic. The unofficial cause? Assassination. Catherine hadn't inherited the throne. She had taken it. By brilliance, audacity, and sheer force of will. She became empress not through birthright or marriage, but by daring. And yet, grabbing the crown was only the beginning. Now she had to prove she could wear it. The enlightened autocrat, Catherine could have rested on her throne, enjoyed her stolen power, and left things as they were. But she didn't. She had no interest in being a placeholder ruler. She wanted to transform Russia, culturally, intellectually, even spiritually. While Peter had idolized Frederick the Great and played dress-up with his battalions, Catherine admired Voltaire, Diderot, and the thinkers of the Enlightenment. She corresponded with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattered him endlessly, and bought Diderot's entire library to support him financially. Her belief in progress, education, and rational governance ran deep, even as she ruled with absolute authority. Behind palace doors, Catherine was a policy wonk. She studied legal theory, reviewed draft laws, and spent long hours debating ideas with advisors. In 1767, she convened the Legislative Commission, an ambitious attempt to overhaul the entire Russian legal code. Her personal instruction to the commission, the Nakaz, was a bold political statement wrapped in idealistic philosophy. It called for equality before the law, denounced torture, and argued that a ruler's duty was to serve the people. She was, in short, a contradiction. An enlightened despot, a bookish conqueror. A German-born woman reshaping Russia, not just through power, but through ideas. For an 18th century empress, Catherine's commitment to Enlightenment ideas was nothing short of revolutionary. But Russia wasn't exactly fertile ground for idealistic philosophies. This was a country sprawling across continents, immense, conservative, and entrenched in a rigid feudal system that kept millions of peasants or serfs bound to the land like livestock. The nobility thrived on that imbalance. and if Catherine wanted to keep their support and her crown, she couldn't simply dismantle the system, no matter how many volumes of Voltaire she read. She knew this. She was no naive philosopher queen blindly chasing utopia. Catherine was a realist with a library. So yes, she preached reform and even enacted some of it. She abolished the worst forms of judicial torture. She encouraged secular education, built new schools, and stocked libraries with Enlightenment thought. She pushed literacy, funded intellectual salons, and tried to gently drag Russia out of the medieval mud. But there's always a but. She also strengthened the nobility's grip on their serfs. In exchange for loyalty, she handed them more control, more land, and more power over the very people the Enlightenment said should be free. Catherine was constantly balancing on a high wire stretched between Parisian ideals and Russian politics, between Rousseau and realpolitik. In public, she was a champion of reason. In private, she was the guardian of stability. Her goal wasn't to make Russia a European clone. She didn't want a French-style revolution storming the palaces. She wanted a uniquely Russian version of progress, modern, strong, and entirely under her control. Enlightenment, yes, but always with one hand on the sword. Catherine the Conqueror, redrawing the map. Catherine didn't just want to polish Russia's image from within. She wanted to expand it, to make her empire not only enlightened, but enormous. While Peter the Great had once opened a window to the west, Catherine wanted to blow out the walls and add entire new wings. She envisioned a Russia that didn't just participate in European politics, it defined them. Her military campaigns were relentless, ambitious, and successful. The Ottoman Empire, long a thorn in the side of Russian rulers, became one of her main targets. The wars she waged in the 1760s and 1770s weren't only about gaining territory, though she did plenty of that. They were about influence, religious, political, and symbolic. Catherine cast herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule. Under legendary commanders like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia seized Crimea, secured dominance over the northern Black Sea, and gained long-coveted access to warm water ports. These were strategic and symbolic wins. Russia was no longer the frozen, remote cousin of European royalty. It was a continental superpower. She didn't stop there. Turning westward, Catherine participated in one of the most infamous geopolitical carve-ups in history, the partitions of Poland. Alongside Austria and Prussia, she took part in dividing the ailing Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth like a holiday pie. By the third partition in 1795, Poland was gone from the map, and Russia had absorbed huge swaths of land and millions of new subjects. But Catherine didn't just conquer with swords. She colonized with strategy. She oversaw the founding of new cities, the construction of roads and trade routes, and even invited German settlers to cultivate Russian farmland. From the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched Black Sea, her empire became a patchwork quilt of cultures, regions, and peoples, with Catherine's signature stitched into every seam. To some, this looked like imperial overreach. To Catherine, it was destiny. She believed a great ruler was measured not just by lofty ideas or noble speeches, but by borders. She didn't want to simply inherit a throne. She wanted to remake the world that throne overlooked. Passion and power. The empress behind closed doors. But of course, it wasn't just battle maps and policy drafts that defined Catherine's legacy. The empress's love life became almost as famous as her reign, and far more scandalous. Unlike her prudish contemporaries, Catherine made no secret of her lovers. She had many, often younger, always well-groomed, and occasionally politically savvy. These weren't just romantic flings. They were carefully chosen companions, some of whom wielded real influence. She rewarded them generously with land, titles, and pensions. And when their usefulness faded, she dismissed them with grace, sometimes even with a promotion tucked in the goodbye note. One of the most significant was Grigory Potemkin, a man who was far more than a dalliance. He was bold, brilliant, and arguably her equal in ambition. Their relationship straddled the line between love affair and political alliance. Some historians speculate they may have married in secret. Regardless, Potemkin was no mere consort. He co-led military campaigns, helped colonize the south, and helped craft the very framework of the empire. He was, in many ways, Catherine's partner in building Russia's future. Still, Europe's gossip mills churned with salacious stories. Pamphlets painted her as insatiable, immoral, even unstable. After her death, enemies escalated the rumors to grotesque extremes, the most infamous being a completely fictional and disgusting tale involving a horse invented solely to stain her memory. Why the obsession? Because Catherine broke every rule. She wasn't saintly or submissive. She didn't hide her desires or apologize for her autonomy. In a world that demanded female rulers be either virgins or victims, she refused to be either. She loved, ruled, and lived without shame, and that made her dangerous. Ironically, the empress accused of excess was often more philosophical about love than her male counterparts. Catherine believed that pleasure was a natural part of life, not a threat to leadership. She separated emotion from governance with surgical precision. Her lovers were loyal, useful, and when necessary, replaceable. In the end, her love life wasn't a flaw in her reign. It was part of her strategy, a blend of romance, power, and shrewd politics that made her unforgettable. Rebellion in the heartland, Pugachev's uprising. But even the most brilliant rulers have moments when the empire quakes. For Catherine, that quake came in 1773, and it had a beard, a sword, and a very strange story. Entered Yemelyan Pugachev, a former Cossack officer with a knack for persuasion and a dangerously compelling lie. He claimed to be Peter I, Catherine's long-dead husband, miraculously alive and ready to reclaim his throne. Absurd, absolutely. But to the millions of serfs, peasants, and marginalized groups crushed under the weight of feudalism, the truth didn't matter. Hope did. Pugachev promised land, freedom, lower taxes, and the end of serfdom. His rebellion swept across the Volga like wildfire. Towns fell. Nobles were killed. Fortresses were seized. For a terrifying moment, it looked like the empire itself might crack wide open. This wasn't an invasion. This was an explosion from within. Catherine was shaken. She couldn't simply sign a treaty or send a diplomat. This was her own people, rising up against the very system she upheld. But she didn't hesitate. She dispatched her armies, now seasoned from foreign wars, and crushed the rebellion without mercy. In 1774, Pugachev was captured, paraded through Moscow in an iron cage, and publicly executed, a warning writ large in blood and steel. The message was clear: challenge the crown, and the price is death. But the rebellion had consequences. Catherine's flirtation with liberating the serfs came to a quiet end. She tightened the leash. Reforms slowed. The nobility, rattled but still loyal, were rewarded with greater powers. Surveillance increased. Talk of revolution was no longer amusing. It was dangerous. Catherine had learned a hard truth. Enlightenment ideals had their limits in a country built on inequality. Philosophy was great for palace salons, but only if no one outside the palace tried to apply it. Final years, the woman who rewrote empire. As Catherine aged, she showed no signs of slowing. By the time she approached the twilight of her life, she had ruled Russia for over 30 years, longer than any other female sovereign in the nation's history, and what a reign it had been. From the moment she grabbed the throne with ambition and steel, she rewrote the script not only for monarchs, but for women in power. She modernized Russia's institutions, expanded its borders, crushed internal threats, and navigated a world that rarely made room for rulers like her. She was adored, she was feared, she was misunderstood, and she was unforgettable. By the end of Catherine's reign, Russia was no longer a remote, lumbering empire on the fringes of Europe. It had become a force, militarily, politically, and culturally. Under her leadership, Russia's borders had ballooned by over 200,000 square miles, absorbing Crimea, vast territories along the Black Sea, and great swaths of Poland. But these weren't just trophies from war. They were deliberate, strategic expansions designed to secure warm water ports, strengthen trade routes, and give Russia a seat at the table among Europe's great powers, not as a guest, but as a rival. Yet Catherine's legacy was never just written in ink on a map. It lived in brushstrokes, books, and ideas. She founded what would become one of the greatest art institutions in the world, the Heritage Museum, initially housed in her private quarters. She filled it with masterpieces from Western Europe, from Dutch landscapes to French portraits. Her passion for the arts was matched only by her intellectual appetite. She corresponded with Voltaire, Diderot, and other Enlightenment heavyweights, not as a passive admirer, but as an active participant. She debated, disagreed, challenged, and flirted, both intellectually and at times politically. Under her influence, Russia's image transformed in the eyes of Western Europe. No longer seen as purely brutal or backward, it now radiated a curated sophistication. Her court became a beacon of elegance, learning, and culture, a monarch with one foot in Moscow and the other in Parisian philosophy salons. She modernized education, not just for elites but also for girls, a radical gesture at the time. She promoted the printing of books, the circulation of ideas. She even brought smallpox inoculation to Russia, publicly receiving the vaccine herself, in an age when many feared it could be fatal or heretical. It was an act of public bravery and scientific conviction. But for all her progress, Catherine's reign was one of persistent contradictions. She admired Enlightenment ideals, courted Rousseau, translated Montesquieu, but never freed the serfs. In fact, she expanded serfdom, especially in newly annexed lands, binding millions more to a system she privately saw as outdated and cruel. Her reforms were often cosmetic more than structural, sweeping from the top down and designed to impress European peers, more than uplift Russia's lowest classes. Still, she brought stability, ambition, and enduring reform to a nation prone to chaos. She understood, better than most rulers, that power wasn't inherited. It was constructed, constantly managed, and never truly safe. She ruled not by divine right, but by force of will, political genius, and a relentless ability to read both people and moments. People called her many things: a usurper, a tyrant, a philosopher queen, a seductress. But above all, she was effective. When she died in 1796, Russia was larger, wealthier, more formidable than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne secured, a court admired, and an empire whose momentum would echo through history. Catherine didn't just reign, she ruled, with intellect, strategy, and an unapologetic grip on destiny. And in doing so, she became more than an empress. She became a myth. More than a crown, the woman behind the empress. For all her power, territory, and public triumph, Catherine the Great remained, at her core, a woman navigating an empire not built for her, and certainly not meant to be ruled by her. She was never supposed to wear the crown. She was German by birth, a foreigner in a land suspicious of outsiders. She came to power through a coup, not coronation. She ruled a court that didn't trust women, especially ambitious ones. And yet, she didn't just survive, she thrived. Catherine wasn't ornamental. She was a worker, a reader, a writer, a planner. Her daily routine was more grueling than glamorous. Hours of reading dense state reports, drafting foreign correspondence, editing legislation, managing ministers and courtiers who would have gladly seen her fail. She governed with the endurance of a career politician and the hunger of someone who had everything to prove. And still, she felt deeply alone. She filled her world with lovers, artists, scholars, but trust remained scarce. In her memoirs, she confided that few people ever truly understood or supported her. Her son Paul became one of her deepest anxieties. She distrusted his judgment, feared his temper, and excluded him from governance, worried he would undo everything she had built. That decision created a rift so deep that she considered bypassing him in the line of succession altogether. The man who came closest to being her equal, Grigory Potemkin, evolved from passionate lover to platonic partner. Their bond outlasted desire. It became a collaboration of minds. When he died in 1791, Catherine was devastated. The woman who had withstood rebellions, coups, and the endless chess game of power finally cracked, if only privately. But Catherine understood legacy. She crafted it like a statesman and a playwright. She posed for portraits that showed her as Athena, as a mother, as a monarch. She presented herself as the embodiment of Russian destiny, even if behind the image was someone who had endured rejection, scandal, betrayal, and loss, and kept moving forward. When she died, history didn't just remember her, it crowned her. Not with the title she gave herself, but one earned by decades of dominance, the Great. Not because she was perfect, not because she was kind, but because she seized power in a world that told women to sit quietly and smile, and rewrote the rules in her own hand. She didn't inherit greatness, she engineered it. Everything about the burial whispered royalty, the jade, the craftsmanship, the reverent care with which the body had been laid to rest. And yet, no name, no glyphs, no inscriptions carved to announce her to eternity. It was one of the richest female burials ever discovered in Miss America, and yet it spoke only in riddles. No dates, no titles, just red dust, green stone, and enduring silence.